Yeah,
to stay
I had
focused?
to move over to this office because I seriously was struggling to be productive.
That's really funny. Yeah, I have a pretty nice view, but I have to keep the window closed all the time because it messes with like recording and streaming and all that. So it kind of bums me out.
Yeah,
But
control
maybe
the
it's a
lighting.
distraction.
I just
still can't
closed
hear
my
me, I
window.
guess, right? Or can you hear me now?
Oh, here it
Yes.
comes. It's quiet, but we got
It's
you.
really quiet.
Man, everyone's got such nice setups. Look at this. This is really legit.
Bunch of professionals. Look at us.
Just
Am
a
I
bunch
still
of
really
loud
quiet,
guys
or
is
is it-
No,
what we
you're
are.
great now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
What's
Taylor.
up, guys?
Nice to meet you,
Welcome.
man.
Yeah, nice to meet y'all.
Yeah, the three of us. So me, Adam, and Ryan have all met in person. I don't think you guys. Have any of you met Taylor?
I don't think. I don't think
That was not on purpose. I'm really sorry.
it's okay.
This is like your cash control tweet, man. You don't know the names of the things you're talking about.
No, I don't think I've
I was
ever met
actually-
anyone actually from this call.
Okay, well, why would you? We're all, JavaScript developers.
Yeah. we're
Filthy
all morons.
JavaScript developers.
No, it's. I was just thinking about how like what conferences are there that like would attract both me and Taylor. Like there
I
should
have
be
no
one.
idea. Yeah, I can only think of like huge conferences like an AWS reInvent or something that might.
Yeah,
I don't know
and
if you
that-
would go to something like that, but
And we never
Yeah,
see
I'm
each other
not
because
like-
50,000 people there. So
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not walking around to figure out which booth to talk to and then go back to my boss and be like, I think that we should.
yeah.
the
Yeah, bummer.
first conference, the first conference I ever went to was reInvent. Me and Adam actually both went to reInvent together. It was the first ever conference, and it's a lot.
It's a week long. It's a lot. There's so many people.
Yeah, it's maybe worth going to because it's so crazy, but I don't recommend it. I don't know if it was really enjoyable. It was like more of a exertion event than anything. Yeah,
A social workout.
yeah, it was a lot. All right, well, speaking of social workout, thank you both of you for joining. So just to set some context, I'm realizing that I planned to stream this, but I didn't ask you guys if that was okay.
Yeah.
You guys
fine
fine doing
with
it
me.
live? Okay, cool. So I will do that right now. Maybe Adam, you can do the intro while I figure that out.
Oh yeah, the intro. Let me read off the intro.
An intro.
We don't have an intro. We have done this almost 100 times. So by the end of it, you're going to be like, really? Like you guys have done this almost 100 times? You're that bad at podcasting? We mostly just hang out. Like we've had a few guests on the show. It's not like a big thing we do. We don't have a lot of guests. And when we do, we don't always like dive into like their technical background or that kind of thing. I think there's some things we probably want to talk about on this one that are technical. And if it gets too nice, because I know we're all going to be very friendly, like we're on the face-to-face call, I've got some tweets pulled up that I can read. Don't make me do it. I'll do it. No, I
And
think
you
that's
can read
pretty
it.
good.
You can read it with the wrong voice, as
Yeah,
usual.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we can all
Yeah, that
misinterpret it in all the best ways.
Yeah.
I think, I guess, like, Dax, while you're pulling up streaming, one, like, if we needed a way to kick it off, if you guys were, like, looking for a conversation starter, I would like to get out of this call and understand what is full stack. Like, what does that actually mean? Maybe everyone else on the call knows, but I'm more confused than ever, and mostly from Twitter. I think I thought I knew what it meant, but I think everyone probably has different takes on it. And maybe it's just a dumb word or dumb term that we don't need.
Yeah. And just to set some context, the reason we're even doing this is, so last week, what's his username? WebDevCody. He was trying out Laravel, and his initial reaction was like, oh, there's so much stuff here. Like, why is there so much stuff? It feels bloated, this is really overwhelming. And Taylor quote tweeted, adding some context, which is, well, we focus a lot on backend needs, and backends need a lot of stuff. Doing stuff asynchronously, job processing, queues, like everything that you find in any like moderately complex app. And there's a whole bunch of discussion
Mailers,
around
roles
what that
on
meant.
users,
yeah.
middleware. Yeah.
And in that tweet, I think Taylor contrasted it with things like Next.js and Remix, where it has almost none of that, and they focus in a completely different area. And the claim was those aren't full stack because it's missing these things that are like you said, like every application eventually ends up having some of those.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Although I'm willing to actually concede that I think those things are full stack in some sense of the word. And it's maybe better to talk about Laravel and Rails as like a different word, like batteries included or some other term, that is more than full stack.
I think the default is what Rails and help me out. How do you pronounce the name of your framework?
I say Laravel. Some people say Laravel. Some people say larval.
Larval, yeah, like the thing coming out of an egg or something, or an insect.
Tyler. What else?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the difference?
You're gonna butcher everything.
Okay, so you say Laravel.
Yeah, that's how I say it.
Laravel. Okay, that's the best pronunciation.
I feel like you get to decide, Taylor, how it's said.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah,
just make
to me,
everyone
yeah.
do what you want them to do.
Yeah, our framework is called Remix. It's not. But everyone says it wrong. You ever notice that Elon Musk calls it Tesla with like a Z? Tesla.
Oh, yeah. That's funny.
Nobody else does that. But no, so Taylor, I think the default term, like definition of full stack, is basically what Rails and Laravel are. Like I don't think that should change. They should have a new name. Like we're the weirdos coming in and being like, "Hey, I'm running JavaScript on the server. It's full stack."
Yeah. I think
so-
historically it was like Rails, for example, was full stack, and something like Sinatra people called like a micro framework, and those were sort of the two distinctions. But now, like I do think the word full stack has kind of changed a little bit in the JavaScript world to mean just the ability to run code on the server or the client. Which
Yeah, so we've
I think
actually-
that's not wrong. I don't think it's totally wrong. It's just different than how it used to be.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little background on why I used the term on the Remix website when we first launched. And honestly, this last week has been kind of funny because internally on the Remix team, we're like arguing about, is it actually full stack? But my personal definition, this isn't like the Remix team, and as much as people like to think that Michael and I are the same person, we're not. And that's where the magic happens, right? If you just agreed on everything, you'd probably end up like selling coffee through a terminal and requiring people to send you their ID RSA key to buy something. You just end up doing
We are
weird
all very
stuff.
aligned on that.
But no, my definition of full stack is you can run code on both sides. If you look at the hard thing is you can't look at these things. Actually, I have two things I want to say right off the bat. First of all, ButcherBox. I think Taylor and I know this about ButcherBox. I don't know if anybody else does.
I'm a vegan, so no.
I'm a ButcherBox customer. I've been a customer for an extremely long time.
So
to
Dax,
the
what do you
point
think?
where-
What do you think
Go ahead.
ButcherBox is? A Remix app or a Laravel? Oh, I did it wrong. Laravel.
No, a Laravel app. My experience with ButcherBox is when they first started, the site was the slowest site I'd ever used in my life. Like just crazy slow. So I don't know what they were doing, and at some point it got a lot better. That's my only experience of it. I have no idea what the reason is for that. I'm sure it was just user error. Like it was like way too slow. But I don't know. I have no idea about it.
So I don't know what it was before it got fast, but I know today it's a Remix app that talks to a Laravel backend. So first of all, like our two frameworks are not like always competing, right? They work together really well, and lots of people deploy stuff like that. So that's the first thing about this whole thing is that it's like we have focused on different things to the point that some people want to put a big line between it and be like, all right, everything backend is Laravel, everything front end is Remix, and then in Remix loaders, they're just going to talk between the two things, right? But the other thing that kind of bothers me, especially in your tweet, Taylor, is, and has nothing to do with you, this has happened to us since we launched Remix, is that everybody just saw Remix, they saw React, they saw an X in the name just like Next, and they're like, oh, this is like Next. And in your tweet, you were talking about in Next and Remix, it seems to mean that there is simply the bare ability to run code on the server at all, and an advertisement for Clerk. That's my favorite.
I love that line.
It's so good. Um, so first of all, like when we launched Remix, I was like, how do I do auth? And we're like, just make a table and hash the password and put it in there. Like, just give it a shot. Don't go to Clark. Or sure, go use Clark. And then the second thing was Next and others are really, really great at the get. They're not mature for post, put, and delete, especially when things start getting non-trivial. So this is like a huge badge of pride for us with Remix, is that we're old school PHP. I did CodeIgniter and Symfony and Kohana. Kohana was my favorite one, actually. And then I did like just bare bones. Like I was setting up linodes, like setting up IP tables and stuff. And then lots of Rails stuff. So we kind of brought a lot of that to React. Like we just like it's like there's this whole community of React haters that look at React like, oh, all those idiots that don't even know how the web works. And we're like, we actually like we're in that group with you. and Remix was our attempt to be like, let's bring HTTP to React. You can render it on the server. So Remix from the start has had, we did a convention where you can stick it next to your component, where you get your component, loader, and action. Loader is what we do when it's a get with the component, and then action is when we respond with a post. So we've always supported that stuff, and it's always been frustrating, like getting lumped into like, oh, I bet you just statically generate stuff, to the point that we kind of purposely didn't do static rendering, just to like keep that difference very, very clear. That like, no, we want you to run a server and we want to speak HTTP. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I honestly think this entire discussion, the most interesting part to me is not really the full stack, the what is full stack stuff. It's more like what is the easiest, I guess you would say, ecosystem or platform for actually shipping a real product, a real business, which is really the most, like, the whole thing I'm interested in, because that's why Laravel was built, was so that I could build startups faster and ship them out into the web and make money. And I think that's really why Rails was built too. And it feels like Laravel and Rails are just more fleshed out in a way where if you want to sit down as one person and build an honest-to-God product that you can ship, it just feels a lot faster if you're using something like Rails or Laravel versus like a JavaScript framework where you sort of have to like reconstruct a lot of those opinions from scratch, which tends to, I think, I could be wrong, tends to mean that like all of the apps look pretty different in terms of how they're architected and set up, and there's versus like Laravel or Rails, where from app to app there's some pretty good similarities and understanding of how you do a lot of things on the back end that a lot of products need. So I actually find that actually more interesting, than the sort of like what's full stack, what's back end, what's front end, and all of that.
And I'm
Are we streaming yet, by the way?
Yes, we've been live.
Okay.
Yeah. So I could say all the exact same stuff, but like in reverse, where it's like I'm interested in. So you're talking about all the stuff. Like if it's a gradient, right? A full stack is a gradient, and on this side we've got your database, your mailers, your queues, all that kind of stuff. And then like you come over here, you get to the network, you send HTML and JSON, and then you start sending JavaScript, and then you start building like a pending UI or an optimistic UI or just a really dynamic experience. Remix wants to come as far back as controllers, basically. And then we're like, there's a ton of databases. You've already got your Rails app. You've already got your Laravel app. Like you've got that part done. This stuff is where we're trying to push the ceiling of a user experience, and that's where that's where we've approached this. Is it's like, how do you build that really, really dynamic experience and bend the trade-offs of like how much do you do on the server for that UI and how much do you do on the back end. I'm curious how I asked for a few Laravel apps just to go and like click around in the network and look in the browser and see if I could kind of reverse engineer how it was working. But all of the sites that people sent me were React and Vue and stuff.
Yeah.
But I understand that Laravel has stuff to do in the browser. So like I'm more familiar with Rails with like Turbo and Hotwire and PJAX a long time ago.
Yeah.
So what does Laravel have for like I want to make a combo box, right? I want to do a type ahead and I want to search my user table and drop something in there. What is there in Laravel for that?
So I'll kind of back up a little bit and kind of explain how Laravel got to where it is today and how it's different than something like Rails, because I think it's mainly differences between like me and DHH. When Laravel first came out, it was just straight up PHP rendered templates, sent to the client, just like ERB templates in Rails or something. Over time, that was like 2010, 2011. I actually got really into Vue.js around 2015, 2016, and I think this is one of the key differences between us and Rails is that it seems like DHH is like very anti JavaScript at all. Just wants to do as minimal JavaScript as possible, whereas we've actually always been pretty open-minded about different kinds of front ends that are paired with Laravel. So eventually this library called Inertia.js was written that basically lets you tie a React, a Vue, a Svelte front end to your Laravel backend within like a monolithic Laravel app that's all in the same GitHub repo, for example. And so what it looks like actually is all of the routing is handled by Laravel. So you hit a controller, and then you return an inertia response that corresponds to like a React page or component. And you actually pass the props and data from the server-side controller to the Vue or React page, and it's all hydrated in. I don't actually know exactly how inertia works because I didn't write it. And then once that renders, like as far as like a combo box or whatever, you could use whatever React or Vue component library you like. So if you like, ShadCN or the new Catalyst stuff from Tailwind or whatever, you could just drop that in. And then to hook it up to the back end, it's just a matter of, I guess just making either fetch requests to the back end, or Inertia has their own kind of built-in mechanisms for pulling data as well. But once you're on the front end, you can kind of use whatever you want. So I would actually say, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if 50% of Laravel apps, new ones, are built with like a Vue or React front end, and maybe the other 50% are something like Laravel Livewire, which is basically like our version of Elixir's or Phoenix's Live View, or it's a little bit different than Hotwire. I wouldn't fully compare it to that, but so I think that's kind of the current state, front end in Laravel.
So I'm looking at the Inertia website. So when I say return Inertia render users, or if I'm doing like a combo box, so this is just passing data to the front end, or is it like rendering that React component and sending HTML? Like
either.
The component.
Yeah. So I know they have there's a server-side rendering part of it you can run, but let's say you're not doing that. It actually just sends like JSON data to the front end, which is then hydrated into the the Vue or React components. But Inertia is kind of like a wire protocol. You almost might think of it as something like that, that ties together these different front ends with Laravel on the back end. But again, I'm not really the expert to talk to on how it works, but just that a large percentage of Laravel apps are written this way now.
Okay. Because that's a pretty important part for me coming from front end, is that I want it to actually send the HTML for that combo box. I don't want just like a div that's empty that then, okay, JavaScript showed up. I got like a spinner, or I get layout shift, or I got like, or JavaScript hasn't loaded yet, and they like submit a quick
it's not
little
like that
login
at all.
form. Okay, so it's not sending HTML of all your React components.
I just know there's no layout shift, there's no loading, there's no weird stuff like that.
So that would require a node process, though, on the back end somewhere. Okay.
Yep, correct.
Okay, so Inertia.js, if you want to get HTML rendering of your front end, you're going to plug in some kind of node React request handler.
There's a console command like artisan inertia :SSR, which starts off like a node process that does server-side rendering and all of that, and then it all just like works automatically. You still return the same thing from your controller, and Inertia will handle like rendering that using that node process.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's probably like Astro in a lot of ways, where it's just doing the rendering part, but the actual
And, like,
framework doesn't
For
matter.
example, on Forge, we actually don't even use the server-side rendering because it all works fine actually without that. If you don't care about, kind of not sending HTML to the client like fully rendered.
So I have a personal gripe with what happened in my career.
You don't have a
like
Lambo?
I should sell that guitar and then go get like a really old 82 or something that barely runs. Now you got me sidetracked.
Sorry.
I always felt like a full stack developer. I liked, like I told you before, I even enjoyed setting up IP tables on my Linode VPS. I ran a website for my office on like an old iMac for a while. But I also care a whole lot about the user experience. And in fact, I probably geek out a little bit more about the buttons and the styles and the like Stripe's checkout button where like the little word inside the button is animating in with the spinner and then like it animates out, right? Like that kind of stuff is so much fun to me. I ended up at a startup long time ago. And because I was super interested in building a great user experience, I just kind of got pushed more and more and more and more away from the server. And this happened across the whole industry where you end up with these two teams eventually. You got the backend team and you got the front end team, and you quit going to lunch with some of your friends because you just go to lunch with the front end team. and apps started to get really crappy. Like loading spinners, content shift, like there's just a mess. And then you take no offense to designers, but like a lot of designers started to write a little bit more code too without this is going to sound totally wrong, but or rude, but like not as much programming experience and a lot more just slap a thing together because it looks great. And I'm one of those people too, so I don't want anyone to take
How dare
offense to
you,
that.
Ryan? How dare you?
As someone who has been quietly canceled over stuff I didn't do, I'm very careful now. But anyway, so I hated that split, and the architecture you're describing continues to, I think, create that kind of a split. And I think the best user experiences are built by people who like can cross over that line really well. And when it's like, oh, Inertia's going to render the React app for you, so put all the weirdo front end people over there, and all of us real programmers who, have CS degrees or whatever and talk to databases, we're going to go do this. And I hate that split, both on a personal level, and I think it's made websites a lot worse. Like I should not log into my bank and it's making a bunch of fetches to some JSON endpoint and like bouncing spinners all over the place. Do you feel that at all, or?
I don't know. I think the Laravel ecosystem is sort of unique where most of the developers building Laravel apps, I think, would truly consider themselves full stack developers, mainly just because of the historical context of Laravel being geared towards like bootstrappers, people that want to launch things and kind of have to do everything themselves, Obviously, it's been adopted into larger organizations and enterprises and stuff, but just the vibe of Laravel has always been a toolkit for launching a product as quickly and efficiently and as high quality as possible. So most developers kind of know Vue. They may not be, as good as like someone that's just a hardcore front-end developer full-time, but they're serviceable, on Vue or React or something else. So I don't know, I think that's probably how most people would think of themselves in Laravel.
Yeah.
Something else I think kind of interesting to discuss, I think Dax may have tweeted this, is, we mentioned that tools like Next and Remix kind of stop at that controller level, and there's not a lot of like opinions or conventions beyond that as far as, user roles, what database to talk to, how you're going to send email, how you're going to do background work. And I think someone brought up on Twitter, it's not for like lack of trying. Like people have tried to build those kinds of tools for JavaScript before, and they just have never seemed to achieve any sort of critical mass.
Yeah.
And why do we think that is? Like, is it just a cultural thing within JavaScript that it's just seen as better to like kind of roll your own way of doing things, or what is it?
I got two thoughts on that. I went for a run this morning, so I gathered all my thoughts. So I got like a whole outline in my head. The first is, and I've talked to Adam about this, there is no JavaScript community. Like, that doesn't exist. JavaScript is this island because of the browser where every other community comes and just has a battle royale, right? It's like, it's Fortnite for developers. And so it's a lot of people are like, oh, how come the JavaScript community hasn't ever landed on whatever? It's like, well, because I'm Ruby. Like, Remix comes from Ruby and Ember, and PHP. Laravel people come in. That's Laravel coming into JavaScript, and then someone's really interested in the front end, and they start doing more of the React stuff, and then maybe they start getting interested, and then you start pointing at them like, oh, that developer is in the JavaScript ecosystem. It's like, no, they came from Laravel. So that's my first thing. Is it's just a big battle royale on the island of the browser. And so, we're all coming at it from different angles. I think one is kind of forming, but I don't think there is one. So it's a lot easier for Laravel to build a community in PHP, where everyone can look at Taylor and be like, yeah, we trust him, or look at DHH and be like, yeah, we trust him. We're going to do this. You get to JavaScript and it's like, which Ryan are you going to listen to?
Yeah.
The second thing is kind of what I was talking about before, how the industry has ended up with this split of back end and front end, and like this jam stack wall in front of it that kind of showed up. Or in the case of Laravel, you got inertia that it's a great seam between that, but like you're either writing PHP or you're writing React or Vue, but it isn't all Laravel, right? There's something that connects it, and so it's very easy to split those two things up. And so because we have that split, you can't look at Laravel and Rails and JavaScript frameworks in like a snapshot in time of like right now. You have to take it all in context and be like, okay, back when Rails was created, I don't even know when that was. I feel like I was a little kid. I don't even know if I had any kids yet, and my daughter's almost 17. Everyone was pretty much just using MySQL, or I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm a front-end developer. And so it's like, yeah, we can build a norm on that and everyone can agree. Today, there's 8 million databases. So if you kind of take the context of like, okay, in what environment were these front-end, or were these JavaScript full stack frameworks created? People already have their 15-year-old Rails app. And we got this split, right? So that's the way the world looks today. There's a split of front end and back end. And so if people are like, you know what, we need to get back to server rendering this stuff. You don't go back over to Rails and start doing that, because then you're going to lose all the combo boxes and all of the great UX that you did in React. You got to figure out how to bridge that gap differently. And so React apps are not looking for a database. Maybe an indie developer who's like, oh, I want to start my app with React, like they would be. But for the most part, the current state of web development is we've got these Rails apps, these PHP apps. They already have everything they need on the back end. And so the React frameworks just need to cross that gap and then get them there. And then it's like, okay, now go talk to your Rails app. So that's another reason why nothing ever really like sticks in the JavaScript community, because they've already got the back end over there.
So Ryan, what about you? Like a new project, you're building a new Remix app or React Router 7 or whatever. Like, what do you like to use for mailers and databases and queues? And like, is it all kind of patched together? Is there a go-to thing that you use?
My full-time job is work on a framework.
Maybe a better question is like, what do you prescribe? Like if a Remix user asks you, like, is there a recommended thing for all those things, or is it just sort of like that is the stance of most JavaScript front-end frameworks, is you get to choose?
Yeah, well, my first question to somebody is, do you already have infrastructure? Like, do you already have the Rails app? Do you already have the Laravel app? you already have that stuff? And if they do, it's like just deploy them on the same server and talk to them through HTTP and tell it to send an email for you or queue a job or something, right? But then from there, I think it's like, well, go look at where do you intend to host? Are you hosting on Cloudflare? Are you hosting on Vercel? Are you hosting on Netlify, on AWS? Especially AWS, they have everything you need there, right? And so it's like, well, use Cognito, I don't even know what they're all. Use DynamoDB, like use the platform that you're on.
Yeah, the infrastructure thing is interesting. I think Dax, you need to talk about something here. I don't know. The timeline of like how these things all evolved and how infrastructure has changed in the last 5 years.
Yeah. So I think we just from working on SST, I think we come across a portion of the community that's maybe not as visible, which is people building backends with JavaScript. So I think whenever we talk about people building JavaScript stacks, we always start with Remix, Next.js, like just the front end portion of it. But there is like a backend community that builds backends in JavaScript, and they might not even, and a lot of these people don't know front end, like they're not even front end developers because there is a split there. So the question is, why do these people even exist? Like, why are they choosing to use JavaScript on the back end? The majority of them do not like JavaScript. Like, that's not like their first pick. They didn't start in JavaScript. They come from other environments. Myself personally, for me doing JavaScript on the back end started 3 years ago. Prior to that, I was doing Elixir. Prior to that, I was doing Go. Prior to that, I was doing C#. So what like made me end up in a language that I don't even like that much on the back end? It's specifically how infrastructure evolved. And there's a portion of people, like not everyone has to buy into this, but there are a portion of people that understand that if you commit to an environment, whether that's AWS or Cloudflare, and you like do things exactly the way they want you to, there's a bunch of benefits from doing that. Like I haven't used Datadog or like had a monitoring service in years because I use like extremely managed services that scale themselves, monitor themselves, run themselves.
AJ's in shambles.
Our
friend AJ works at Datadog.
To be fair, I did sign up for Datadog recently because of the SSH app.
He's backing up.
That needed monitoring, but mine is that one. Everything I've built in the past, 3 or 4 years, just did not need the usual babysitting that I normally have to do. And if you want to make that trade-off, these cloud providers pretty much ask you to do JavaScript. That's just kind of the reality of it. Like you can do other things, of course, on AWS. You can write other languages, but the support for certain things just isn't there to the level it is in JavaScript. And if you take something like Cloudflare, it's even more extreme, right? Like you literally can't do anything else. This is all JavaScript native. And they kind of, they gave this decision to you where if you accept these like pretty hardcore constraints, we can do all this stuff for you that you pretty much can't find anywhere else, right? So most of the backend community is reluctantly using JavaScript because they're committing themselves to this other thing. And it's not that everyone has to like do that, and it's definitely the way everyone has to go, but there are just tangible trade-offs and benefits from doing that. So the needs of this group of people is quite different than just cloning like what Rails, Phoenix, Laravel has, because a lot of the dynamics there are, we create this really nice bubble for you to live in, and pretty much wherever you want to deploy, we'll give you a way to do that through adapters or whatever. Like you kind of just live in the Laravel bubble and you don't have to worry too much about where it eventually ends up going. Whereas this is the opposite setup. If I wanted something like that in JavaScript, like I just wouldn't, right? If I wanted something that was like a nice full featured, like agnostic environment, I would just go back to using Elixir or whatever else. So I think a lot of these frameworks are just kind of like one-to-one copy. And I'm not like talking down on them at all. Like there's Adonis, and then there's like newer work with Redwood that are trying to head in that direction. I just don't think the market is there because no one is like, I absolutely love JavaScript. I'm going to write JavaScript in the back end no matter what. I just want like a full framework for it. That's at least my perspective on why I'm here and why a lot of the people that we work with are doing JavaScript on the back end at all.
Are you saying there's no JavaScript community?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's like we're all coming from something else for the most part. I think there is like, what gets confused is, I do agree with Taylor that there is a portion of these like indie hacker, indie maker type people that are trying to do that type of thing in the JavaScript world. And it's like, you can't start from, I'm definitely going to build a React app, and then then I'm going to figure out everything on the back end. Like, that's going to be a tough situation, and you either have to do like what me and Adam are doing and commit to infrastructure, or pick one of these other options in different languages that are really geared towards that. Like, that just doesn't, there's just not really a market for that in the JavaScript space. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that's kind of like the summary of where I've been at the past couple of years. Like, one of the people I talk to the most that I guess would be adjacent to the JavaScript ecosystem is Adam Wathen from Tailwind, who started in the Laravel ecosystem. And when we were looking at tools like Next.js or whatever else, it was just very hard for us to imagine how we would build something like, I don't know, any sort of like robust web app. Could be like Laravel Forge, something like Basecamp, something like Linear, using like only these tools and those alone. But I guess if it's like sort of accepted that, like, of course you wouldn't do that, you would just call some Rails or PHP backend to do a lot of the backend heavy lifting, then fine.
Or what your host provides, yeah.
Yeah. But it just felt like some of the messaging, I guess, was like, I guess just like almost like Next versus Laravel, like, it's like a real alternative to that robust full stack experience when, I don't know, it just didn't feel that way. So we were like perpetually confused of like, how would we ever ship a product like this? But maybe we're just like kind of coming at it from the wrong angle. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
So I will say a big portion of what we do is help companies ship the front end portion of it. Very few of them is that thing their whole app. They have like a completely separate backend that does typical backend things. They're also written in JavaScript, but to me, at least right now, and I don't see why this really change. Like, I don't see many projects, even early stage ones, that are just this. My whole system, it just lives in this.
But on Twitter, you would think, they make it. Yeah, it seems
exactly,
like Next.js is all you need. Like, you're good. I mean, that's what Vercel would kind of make
I
you
do think it comes across that way. Like, is Vercel written with Next.js? I don't know. Like, the whole app, it seems unlikely. I don't know that the whole like deployment pipeline is a Next.js app.
No, it's a bunch of like Kubernetes and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Guys, I'm right here.
Oh yeah, sorry. We have an ambassador from the JavaScript framework, but you're not even a framework anymore. You're just like a library, right? There's differences.
You're
or
talking
something.
about Next.js. Like, they aren't here.
Well,
we're
talking
no,
This is what I
negatively.
said at the
We're
beginning.
talking
Remix is in Next.js, and here we are talking about Next.js.
But I mean,
And
that's
Next is
the
in TypeScript. It's not even Next.js. It's Next.ts.
I don't think. That's good. I don't think Remix is as big a fender as Next in that
That's
regard.
what I was going to ask. Like, Taylor, have you felt
No, I
anything
agree
from the
with that.
Remix community that's like, oh, we can totally,
No,
we're the
I don't-
whole stack for you?
No, I don't really get those vibes. I think that mainly seems to come from like, and Twitter is such like a weird place, disconnected from reality. But like
the worst and the
vibes
best.
I get are that like all you need is Next, and it's mainly from that community.
Yeah.
I think that's, I don't know. So that's the main vibe I get. I was just fixing to say something else too. I don't know. Oh yes, Dax. Like on the backend JavaScript, like what's kind of the thing there these days? Like, is it Express.js or is it something like, what are they calling?
Yeah. So
Well,
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's like Cloudflare. You put a bunch of files in a folder, and they call them, right? Like, you don't really.
So there's a spectrum here. So if you're like infrastructure heavy, right? Let's take AWS. You use something called API Gateway, which is a router that's like a service. So you're not like, you don't need something to route in your application level. It's handled at the infrastructure level. It's a bunch of benefits from that. I actually don't like that much because I don't like that specific service.
And
But,
does that route to like a Lambda that's running some JavaScript? Or?
It routes to, yes, one or many Lambdas. You can also tell it, here's the schema that I expect, and it'll do validation before it even hits your code. So obviously you're paying less for that. It's written in a really efficient language. There's a bunch of benefits to doing that stuff. Again, I personally don't love that, But there is a section of the AWS community that like really takes advantage of those primitives.
It goes even further, right, Dax? Like the more extreme example would be like step functions, where you're not even writing loops anymore, or like
You're not even writing like a traditional code,
yeah, back off mechanisms. All this stuff is like in the infrastructure, and you're writing these tiny little. If you're even writing any JavaScript, you're writing these tiny little functions that do single purpose stuff. So there's like this very extreme case where people think you should take advantage of the extremities of AWS. Sorry, continue.
It's like AWS becomes your programming language in a lot of ways. Like I said, I don't know if that. There are a lot of companies that are super into that model and they built big, complex things with it, and they make it work. It just doesn't click for me personally because I like programming languages and I don't want to like get away from them so much. Then you take something like Cloudflare, which is a little bit kind of in between. They don't provide you as much, and you're still running like your application code's doing the routing. And there you have some options like Hono, which is like, it's very much like Express, but just runs across all these different places and takes advantage of the infrastructure specific details that exist there. But yeah, beyond that, like you just don't need as much application stuff. Like wherever you end up falling on the spectrum, you just don't need it. If the services are designed well, you want to use it.
Ignoring the marketing that feels one way or another from Vercel and Next, where we're coming from remixes, it's like we recognize that there is this different way to deploy apps, and that there's these infrastructure companies now that have all of this stuff for you. So it's like we're not going to show up and be like, hey, guess what? Yeah, deploy this to I forgot what the name is. Not Heroku, the other one, a DigitalOcean droplet. Like that's how Remix works. It's a node process. If we were just a node process, then yeah, we could do a whole bunch of we could do a bunch more abstraction for people. But we were born in a different era where all this infrastructure exists and people's own personal infrastructure also exists. So it's definitely different target audiences. That I think we're going for.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this stuff, I think people look at it externally and it feels like it should be able to be replicated. But I was saying this the other day where there's brief moments of time and there's like comes down to like singular individuals seeing something and executing on it well. And I think a lot of what we're seeing with Laravel today is a result of some decisions you made 10 years ago that were correct that are just panning out now, right? So it's really hard to like exactly recreate it because there's just such brief moments where everything aligns and there's the right environment, there's the right appetite for something, there's the right opportunity, there's the right people leading it. Yeah, these things are kind of like miracles to me when they actually pan out. So it's hard to recreate.
Dude, and Laravel, oh my gosh, dude, I have so much respect for what you've done, Taylor. When we started Remix, it was like VCs wanted us to be Vercel. Everyone was trying to give us money because like, oh, we missed out on them, so maybe we can give it to these guys. We didn't really want to do that. We were probably going to do something a lot more like what you did. I love when you go to Laravel and it's like community and you click and it's like, here's 18 things right here that are going to like solve the problems that your app actually needs to solve. That's before we open source and stuff. That's kind of what I was imagining we would do. So huge respect for what you've done. I have a little bit different topic I want to bring up if everybody is ready to move on from this.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think JavaScript frameworks are the only ones in position to be the fullest stack.
Keep going.
So
I think I agree, but I'll let you continue.
Like we talked about before, how there's this line between like I'm writing the PHP and now I'm writing the JavaScript side of the app, right? React server components that we've been excited about the whole time, but also critical of as we're doing it, because a lot of what React is doing is creeping into the Remix, I don't know, problem space, which we're fine now. Anyway, nobody cares about the React stuff in here. But what it does is it's dissolving the network, right? You got your backend code, you got your front end code, and then there's like a network in between there. And if you want to, prime example of this is if you're always rendering on the server, the Hey calendar. If you go to the Hey calendar, I don't know if any of you have played with it, but there's so much latency in every single user interaction.
It's not good.
It's not good. Inertia is super cool because it lets you render that stuff on the server. But so we'll go back like a step even farther back that I think isn't good with Rails, and it's like the calendar pop-up was the first thing I noticed. When you click on a day to like get the calendar pop-up, there is latency there because they got to go to the server, render the HTML, and then send it back, right? And then we drag events back and forth. You drag it, let go, and then it pops back exactly where it was. And then after the network's done, it shows up over in the new spot. So these problems, you have to render in the browser, right? So you've got to have a JavaScript template somewhere that when you click the button, you can just tell the browser, render this thing. We used to like send hidden divs and like show, like pop them up and stuff, but like I think everyone is kind of beyond that phase of it with all the problems that it caused. And so that movement of like, okay, this interaction, the latency's bad. We need to render this in the browser. With Inertia and Laravel and React, you're going to move that pop-up from PHP over to React, right? You're going to cross that gap, and now the person in charge of that is the guy who went to eat at McDonald's for lunch instead of the guy who went over to wherever else, right? It's now a different team in charge of that template. Or just in your own mind.
I would like to believe if I could get DHH to try Inertia, he would just delete Hotwire. That's what I would like to believe. Because I think, I do think like it's holding Rails back. And I loved DHH is my hero, and I hate to say it pains me to say this, but it's holding Rails back. And you can Hey Calendar is the perfect example of how and like why it's holding Rails back.
It's an like amazing product. The team there is so good at building great products, but the UX, like, it seriously feels like I woke up in 2010 and it's like, what is this? Like, this is crap. Like, go use Linear and you'll see what is possible now. And they're just still anyway. It's
just
I feel the
perked
same way.
Linear
I'm
mentioned.
glad someone else brought it up and not me.
But even with Inertia, it's still
I feel
like
the Hey Calendar. Sorry, I feel like it's like, I don't know. Yeah, it hurts me. It's like Michael Jordan when he played for the Wizards. Like, it's just, it's just like, it's just, I don't know. It's not good. And if I could get him on Inertia, I just feel like he would see the light, you know. But
so I think Inertia is a great step in the right direction, but you still have to like. You still have to constantly make this decision of like, is this a thing that I do in Laravel in a PHP template, or is this a thing that I move over to the JavaScript app, right? And that for an individual, that is a lot of friction, and for a team, that's enormous friction to the point where like they might not even deploy these things together. And so how are you going to how is someone, a designer, going to be like, hey, this interaction sucks, let's fix it? And it's like, okay, let's get 2 product managers in the room, and let's get the team lead of each of these, and let's figure out how to move this template from PHP over to JavaScript, right? And so what we've been doing with Remix and now what React can do on its own, I think is so interesting with the use client directive for a React component. You can have that calendar pop up, and it's just rendered on the server, and you can click, go fetch that RSC stream, and then hand it back to React, and it'll render it. And it's a really easy, like, little one-line thing to do. And you're keeping rendering on the server. And then you're like, you know what? This interaction sucks. Let's get rid of the latency, and let's move the template to the browser. You literally just put use client at the top of that thing, of the module. That's it. And now that is part of the JavaScript bundles. And then when you click, you just say set state open true or whatever, right? And now, boom, it's there. So this is what I mean by like we're dissolving the network in a way that I don't think you can do with any other framework than a JavaScript framework, because your template never has to really change. You just put use client at the top, and you can teleport it over the network now, which I think is super interesting. So that's what I think all of us weirdos over in this React world are doing. I know that it's really easy to look at from the outside and be like, what kind of Rube Goldberg machine are those weirdos making? But like that's it. I want that Hey Calendar pop-up to be rendered in the browser, drop a use client at the top. That's it. I think it's super compelling. And with that, thanks for coming to another episode.
Do you think,
of
like, when do you think, like, I mean, JavaScript's been around a long time. When will it, if ever, have sort of the robust full stack product building tool to match something like Rails from 2006? Like,
See, so this is what I think is, so I think this is where I get really excited because I'm like, okay, all of us weirdos in React, we're solving this really, really weird, difficult problem of dissolving the network that I think a lot of other people are like, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just like move it over through inertia, put it over in a React app. Like, just keep doing that. But we're like obsessed with this. Like, no, we're going to change this thing. Once we get that done, once we're done just hyper-focusing on this, like crossing that network gap, we've been doing delayed jobs and mailers and databases for decades now. So I think in the next few years, in the React ecosystem, you're going to see an explosion of amazingly composable backend functionality that is just so easy to add to an app, like easier than Rails or Laravel or any other non-JavaScript thing. We're not there yet because we're just so hyper-focused on this one problem. But I think we're going to be able to backfill that stuff really fast. And they'll be platform-specific. It'll be like, this is for SST and AWS, or Cloudflare, or your own node process, or Prisma, Mailgun, whatever, right? We got that kind of stuff. I think it'll fill in quickly. Yeah.
I think the other dynamic that is annoying but does have a big impact is JavaScript did have a reset with TypeScript. I know like it's just effectively a linter at the end of the day, but it did change a lot of things, and there's so many versions of TypeScript before it became what's considered modern TypeScript. I would say 4.0 plus is when it was like, okay, this is like, we get it now. But when I say we get it, it also took like a couple of years for people to really get it and for libraries to pop up like really taking advantage of TypeScript correctly so that the end user isn't like bogged down by all the concepts of types and everything. And I think in the past year, I feel like there's finally like an understanding around these things that we're seeing libraries and tools come out that properly do stuff. So there's like a big reset. There's also the whole like stupid things like the CJS ESM thing. Like there's a lot of like dumb, like historical bad decisions problems that the ecosystem is just saddled with, and these are all just headwinds that do exist. And there's like a way out of it, but that kind of explains why it seems like it's taking forever.
Makes sense.
I have a question.
What other spicy topics do we have here?
Well, but before we move on past that one, I guess everything you said, Ryan, about you guys all obsessing about the dissolving the network and all that stuff, once you figure that out and you guys like you crack the code and it's all done, could Laravel just like use that? Like instead of inertia, could there be a third option where like Laravel bolts on all this decade of backend stuff and says, well, now we're going to use that cool thing on the network dissolving thing?
Well, that will always be a part of the React world or the front-end JavaScript framework world. Like they're like ButcherBox, they're not going to go. Or actually, Shopify, we've got a 5 million line React app, and I don't know, it's like 15 million line Rails app behind it. Like, no one's going to move that to Node.
Yeah, and most backends are not JavaScript
for a very, very long time.
Yeah, most backends are not, and it's going to be the case forever.
But yeah, I think what you'll see is you'll get rid of all the templates from that backend framework. Like you aren't going to do any rendering with that thing. There's just going to be in your server components, you're just going to be talking either through the local network or in some cases you'll go straight to the database. But yeah, it's designed for that, I think, Adam, to like that's why we don't prescribe the backend stuff, because it's like we want to work with your existing backend.
You know that Blitz.js thing? Do y'all remember that?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the website is still up. Do you think, I mean, that's an example of someone that tried to sort of bring this missing full stack toolkit or whatever, in their words, to Next.js. And do you think that didn't really take off, kind of going back to what you said, Dax, about like people just don't. There's just not a market for people looking for this, like in JavaScript.
Yeah, I think there's just, again, with all these things, there's so many variables, like time, place, people, all of it. Blitz, let's take for granted that they did want to, like people did want it and there was value. And I know a lot of people did use it. What hurt them a lot was Next.js evolved really rapidly, and they were building on top of a framework that they didn't really control or like, have influence on. And they were just constantly chasing breaking stuff, and they had to like tap into Next in ways that I imagine Next developers don't.
They forked it
care
actually.
About. Oh yeah, did they?
Yeah, he eventually forked it, and like that'll kill any community's like trust in it, right? Like, oh, you forked Next? All right, never mind.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
So
we get that with Remix, where it's like, oh, Next has a couple people from the React core team working on it, therefore it's the only one that you should use. Pure. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really hard in this space to, like, I think what's in all these other spaces, someone dominant kind of emerged, some dominant framework, something. They reach a level of dominance. What really kills you is if you bet on something that fails to reach that, because if a bunch of people use Laravel and Laravel didn't become as big as it is today, you're in like a horrible place. And I think in the JavaScript space, it's like, because of what Ryan said, there's so many different sub communities in it. It's really hard to achieve dominance. It's really hard to like deliver something great when you don't really have full attention of everyone in this space. And the other thing with Blitz is it's very geared towards people trying to have Next.js be their whole system, which, it's tough. So that's like a very small market, and there's existing backend. There's people that don't want to write jobs on the back end, all kinds of reasons. But I do like this. I actually think everyone would be happy with this future where, if Remix, solves this really nicely, this whole problem of get the data, render something, deliver it to the end user, but then have a really snappy feel on the app when you actually use it. And everyone can just use that. Like Laravel can use it, Phoenix can use it. Like everyone can just tap into that. That kind of nicely splits the responsibilities, right? Where you guys don't have to try to resolve that. You can just use it, which I guess is like the idea behind Inertia to begin with. Like we're not trying to build a competitor React. We can just tap into everything that they do.
Yeah, the difference is probably that the requests come to Remix at that point, and then Remix calls out to Laravel to get the data.
Yeah.
Instead of
totally.
Laravel handling the request and then calling out to Node to render, right?
Right. Yeah, that would be pretty sweet.
I mean, it would work with Inertia too. I would imagine. Anyway, I'd be surprised if it didn't. Taylor, what do you want to see from the Remix community on Twitter?
I don't know. Like, I think we need to do better on, at least on our side. We've made small attempts at this with Next, but we should probably look at Remix too, of like how to best pair these technologies. Whether that be, I know this is kind of on trend right now, but starter kit, a starter kit for, for what is it? Because when you said you've got someone pairing a Laravel backend and a Remix front end, I was just actually very curious to see like how that all works together, how the authentication works, how they talk to each other, how they structure all that. Because I actually don't have a great idea in my head of what that looks like, just because I'm not a super expert, front-end developer. I think we just need to do better about educating people.
I can put you in contact with them, and I'm sure they would love to chat with you about it. I worked with them. I was having like bi-weekly meetings with them as they were moving over to Remix for a little while. They would love to talk to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, because like I said, I've always been very, I like JavaScript fine, I like Vue, I like React, so I would actually like to flesh out our just kind of documentation and educational material about how to pair some of these frameworks like Remix with Laravel in the most sensible and like productive way. Because I haven't seen a lot of that out there.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
The other thing is any backend can return like an RSC stream, hypothetically, right? Like technically you could have that stream coming from a Laravel application. I don't know if it makes sense, but My
So
understanding
yeah,
is
yeah.
it's
So that's
possible.
actually interesting, right? Are you kind of talking about like, I wrote a Laravel component. It's in PHP. Like I didn't write any JavaScript. I want to build this whole thing with PHP. Send some sort of PHP thing through the RSC wire format, and then dump it in
Yeah.
the page. So
Yeah.
the trick there is, how do you turn your PHP module into a JavaScript module for the browser,
Oh,
right? Because if you're going to do the proverbial counter button, right? And you're going to click that thing, and the count's going to go up, and it's 100% just in the browser, or the pop up on the Hey calendar. How do you convert that PHP template to a JavaScript template? So I don't know if that's WASM or if it's a crazy
chat says
AST
WASM.
transform.
everyone says WASM to everything. Like WASM was supposed to fix every problem for the last 10 years, and
Yeah, it's not.
the only Figma
But
using it, nobody
ReasonML.
else.
Did you guys ever look
I love
at?
Reason.
So Jordan
Yeah.
Walk made React, and then he went and made ReasonML, and it compiled down to React components. So totally different language. So I mean, it should be possible, but that would be the trick. And maybe that's what you're asking more earlier, Adam, of like, can't you just use RSC in Laravel? Yeah, if you build a thing if you build an API in PHP of like, here's what a component looks like, and then you build some sort of compiler that can turn that into a JavaScript module that then targets the React runtimes, like use state and use effect and all that kind of stuff. You could totally do that. That'd be super cool.
yeah.
I like how throughout this entire discussion we've just sort of taken for granted that PHP is a serious language that people should be using. That's just funny. We never stopped to even question that from first principles or anything. Which I appreciate.
Is that what you
thank you all
expected?
and appreciate that.
Michael and I always say that we've just been chasing that PHP high our whole careers. Like,
Like
yeah.
meth.
Yeah,
When
you know, it's
React
a
people are like, this is like PHP, like, we mean that as endearingly as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
I've definitely heard you,
I mean, I
Taylor.
think, like-
I've heard you like say derogatory things about PHP, and I can tell you've
Well,
got more to say on that front.
I mean, I like PHP fine. Like it's not like the prettiest, most elegant language or whatever, but like it's fine. I'm only accidentally a PHP developer. I started as a COBOL and C# developer.
Oh,
and
me
then
and Adam also.
just wanted to build.
Yeah, same.
C#. Yeah.
Well,
you
not
both did
COBOL,
COBOL?
C sharp.
No,
sorry.
Oh yeah.
C sharp.
And I just wanted a way to build products faster, and PHP was easy to throw up on a host, so I just
Yeah.
created a framework for doing that, and other people
That's
started using
interesting.
it. But I
Oh,
mean-
that's
Yeah.
super interesting because that's kind of what
Yeah.
me and Dax were getting at. Of like, well, today AWS and Cloudflare are like these whole platforms, right? So like, we're building a framework to take advantage of that. Where you're like, I wanted like PHP hosting was super easy. You just throw the files up there, and then the host knew how to do stuff. And
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, though, like, I feel like even that API gateway story and that Cloudflare stuff still sounds worse than Rails. Like, is that better? Like, than just like
Oh, the DX is absolutely
Building a
worse.
Rails
Way
app?
worse. Yeah, it's way worse.
The
We're
DX is really
at the
bad. It's
point right
immature.
before
Yeah.
a DHH was like, I'm done with this crap. Like, let's make this good. Like, we're in front. We're at that point still. The capabilities are there, but like piecing it all together still totally sucks. Yeah.
So what is it unlocking then? Is it unlocking scale? Is it what is it? What is it giving you? Reliable? It's just reliable or easy to run
Yeah.
and scale up?
It's I would say it's very low long-term ops. So I think typically when you were talking about building something from 0 to 1, it's not as fast. You're going to go a little bit slower. But the number of surprises you'll run into week to week, month to month is a lot lower. You're offloading a ton of stuff that you wouldn't normally do. Like my team is 3 people. We have a ton of products that we run and maintain. One of them is a full-blown CI services. Like CI services are notoriously like annoying and difficult to run. But if you look at how we designed it, you would be like, why the hell did you guys build it in this like really weird way? It's because we maximized this other property of like, this is the lowest overhead for us to run. So yeah, I think it's all about operations and reducing that. And like I said, you don't have to buy into that, and that's not like what everyone's like number one pain is. But for a significant set of people, that's kind of what they care about.
Yeah, it makes sense. Lowest operational complexity, I guess.
Yeah.
Or pain.
And I agree that DX right now is not great. It is, like I said, that 0 to 1, even just learning which one of these things to use, like how do I plug them together. It is a long journey, and it's way longer than it should be. But again, I think we're still like kind of early in that process.
So this is a slight, I don't know how much longer we want to talk, but maybe a slight change of topic. Something I've thought about is, when I first started building Laravel, I feel like the top of the web developer funnel, it was very common for people to enter web development through PHP. It was definitely not rare, either through WordPress or some other framework like CodeIgniter, like Ryan
Sign
mentioned.
up for Bluehost and they're like,
Whereas,
yeah.
which meant that incoming new developers to web development inevitably ended up learning things like SQL, some amount about how databases work, how sessions work, like all of that stuff, more back-end knowledge. Whereas, now it feels like the top of funnel for people coming into web development, at least, again, from my perception on Twitter, seems to be almost exclusively JavaScript. Typically through something like Remix or Next or Solid or whatever what other frameworks are out there. Do you all feel like that's sort of like created a generation of new developers that is not as familiar with back-end web development as they should be? And is that a bad thing? Like, do you feel like most people coming into web development now know how to write SQL? Whereas that would be very common to know that, 10 years ago. Whereas today, is that the case, do you think? And is that bad if not?
Yeah, so this is like what I was saying earlier, where I was like, I feel like sometimes people look at Remix and put it in this lump of like those kinds of developers that you're talking about, or this top of that funnel, and I'm like, no, we're with you on this. So yeah, I generally would agree with everything you just said, and Remix is honestly kind of on. I can't speak for everyone else who's designed and built it, but for me personally, it was an answer to that. Back in, if Elon hadn't deleted my Twitter account, I could go pull up some old tweets. But when we were about to launch Remix, I started making a bunch of tweets about, hey, remember HTML forms? Most of you probably don't even know what these do anymore. Like, and because our whole mutation API was built around forms for both progressive enhancement and it's just a good API. And so I had a whole bunch of tweets like showing people how forms work, and tons of people don't even know. So ignoring SQL, they don't even, like 3-4 years ago, I was arguing with people, not arguing, enlightening, it looked like arguing, people that like forms actually cause a navigation. Like there's this one guy where he was just like trying to tell me that they don't cause a navigation. I'm like, dude, put a form in an HTML file and hit submit and watch the URL. It's going to change. And then click the back button.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a huge, and I think this goes back to where I'm like, this kind of split happened where it was like, all right, people who kind of know HTTP and the web and sessions and cookies and databases went over to lunch over here, and then they had all the front end people go to lunch over here. And yeah, this is kind of the funnel now. And I think I personally think that's
I don't understand it at all. I've talked about this. I don't think there's anything more complicated in terms of the number of concepts than like modern front end. I feel like we should start even simpler. Like people new to programming should be writing like little CLI apps, and they're just like taking input and doing something with it and outputting it. Like I just, to me, I can't think of a worse starting point in software development than being dropped into like there's bundlers and there's TypeScript and EJS and CJS and whatever, like all that stuff. I made one up. EJS isn't anything. I feel like it's a lot, right? Like to figure all that stuff out.
And you get an error, and you got this disgusting stack trace that's in the middle of the guts of React's render cycle. It's not even your code.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back when I was, so I spent a lot of time consulting prior to my current work, and I felt like a lot of my job was helping people realize like programming could be fun. Because a lot of them were just in these like nightmarish, entirely front end code bases that just weren't designed well, and everything was difficult to do. And anytime you built a feature, they were just trained to expect like every single thing to go wrong, and like nothing can ever really work correctly. That's kind of their perspective, and showing them that, oh, like, you know, it doesn't really have to be like this. That is like a very common thing, and I think that might be. It's unfortunate. I feel very lucky that I got started programming when I did, because it feels like the world was simple. It got more complex with me, so I had to learn like one new concept every couple months. Whereas now it really feels like the entry point is quite difficult. And maybe everyone always feels this way, but it really feels kind of crazy right now.
I think user expectations are a lot different now than they were 15 years ago too, right? Like before it was fine when you used, like, do you remember Lighthouse, the Rails app for like issue tracking? Mm-hmm. It was just like, it looked like a straight up Rails scaffold with a little bit of extra sauce on it. You'd fill out a form, you click submit, the browser would spin, and then you'd go to the next page. And then the other thought is, in the front end, we're really, first of all, the platform's not designed for what we're trying to build in it, right? Like, it's not designed for apps, and we're trying to build apps in it. And so that's already kind of a hostile environment. And we're really on the front end trying to, like, we're pushing the limits of it right now. So new developers getting dumped into, like, I don't even know, like, they're dropped right next to the dynamite where we're blowing up a mine, where it's like, oh yeah, we think that there's gold down here, instead of like putting them over on the monkey bars or something, right, where it would be fun. And so I honestly think a lot of developers should start with Laravel. They should start with Rails. They should start with without any front end anything. Just do document requests, talk to a database. Like, you can build a product like that. You don't need super high fidelity user interactions. And so what I hope we're doing in the React world over here, and Taylor, you should know, in the React world, like, there's factions in here that, like, are always battling as well. So, like, we have this big cohesive group. But right now I'm representing the React Nation. What I hope happens with what we're doing is that we can actually get back to, like, you can use React in this really simple way, right? Imagine a React server component framework, a world where you don't even send any JavaScript. Everything is just a React component. It just runs on the server. You have no use client. You have no use state. You don't have any fancy stuff like that. Just forms and actions and data loading from a database. I think we're right up, like, to that line, and we're just about to cross it to where, okay, everything can be simple again. But yeah, we're pushing on that edge right now. I think we're almost there.
The one other thing that comes up is, again, like, for the people that are trying to, like, push what can we do in the browser, like, how can we, there's kind of forever been this, at least for me, how can we make the web feel as good as a native app? And there's been people pushing that for a very long time. There's no way to do that without writing a lot of JavaScript. Everything from getting accessibility right, all the little details right, now taking advantage of, like, the browser storage. That's like critical for building anything that feels as good as linear. That this just makes you have to write a lot of JavaScript. There's, like, no avoiding that. Not every app needs to go to that degree. I think it's productivity apps that people use every day for their work. I think all of those should be going to that degree, and I think a lot don't. But, you know, that's maybe a small subset of what everyone works on. You just can't avoid it. So, again, reluctantly doing this stuff, not because we enjoy it, but because it's the only way to kind of deliver a certain experience.
There is no JavaScript community.
Right.
Yeah, that's how I think of it too. That's why it all looks like such a mess. Is it's like we're trying to build really, really great user experiences, and that requires a ton of JavaScript.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. If someone was going to build an app like that with Laravel, they would definitely choose inertia every time. Like, they would never try to do it with PHP or even with Livewire. I think if you're going to try to build something like as high fidelity as something like a linear or a good calendar, you know, like you would always start with inertia.
Good calendar.
I don't think any Laravel developer really would try to do otherwise.
Yeah, cool. All right, well,
Have we said it all?
We're a little over time. Any last thoughts? Anything we didn't get to?
Let me see.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
Ryan has notes from his jog.
I always have notes, man. I don't come into these unprepared. I gotta win. No. I just huge respect for you, Taylor. I absolutely love what you've done with Laravel, and your target audience, they should absolutely start with Laravel instead of cobbling together some crazy backend with Remix. 100%, I agree with that.
Yeah. And we like as SSC, we study the Laravel docs a ton just to understand everything, just from like taste to scope to how you communicate things. So it's been a huge influence on us as well. Like obviously, for the reason I said, we're not like trying to do exactly the same thing, but the goals of what you guys have done and are trying to do, definitely can appreciate.
We should get a definition of full stack.
Yes.
Ooh,
from each
come
of
full
you.
circle.
I've talked way too much, so I'm not going to give the definition.
Okay, I was going first. I'm actually fine saying it just means the ability to run code on a client or server, which I think honestly qualifies like, Remix and Next and those tools as full stack. I think like I'm fine with that as like a definition.
We
And
reserve
leave things
batteries
like Laravel
included.
and Rails as something more, as something beyond that.
Just goes deeper one direction or the other.
Yeah.
I like that definition.
That's kind of why I brought where this all started, because it really wasn't about that. The original thing was like this implication that Laravel was bloated, and there's an explanation for why.
And I only responded to that because I saw Theo retweeted it, and then I knew it was like it had to be addressed.
He's always the middle. Every single thing is there's like a little like always Theo involvement, of course.
Yeah. Oh, hang on. I got one more thing to say. I have one more thing to say. A little bit spicy. My whole impression forever is that, and Adam, you got at this too, where you're like, the Laravel community is amazing. They use Tailwind and they don't talk about it. Everyone, it's like, it sounded like Laravel was like Canada, where like everyone is just so nice and so even keel and nuanced and like this big kumbaya. I got some like funny people in my replies with just a couple things I said. And I don't feel like I said anything spicy because I have tons of respect for Laravel. So anyway, I got lots of Laravel fans in my mentions that were not Canadian at all.
In any sense of the term, yeah.
So you're not better than us. Like you get poked a little bit, and it's just as bad as the JavaScript world.
That's probably true for sure.
We're all the same.
You just don't have enough
JavaScript
eyes
people
on
are
it.
worse. I will acknowledge. I think the JavaScript community is the worst of the worst, but
It's
we're
the
all
worst.
bad.
Yeah. That's
you
agreed,
think-
100%.
Will the JavaScript community, does it even make sense to think that it would ever be like unified in the Ruby or the Rails or like Laravel sense? Will that just like never?
No, I
There
argue
is no
more with
JavaScript.
It's too
JavaScript
broad.
people. Yeah, I argue more with the JavaScript community than any other community. Like I have more issues with what's happening internally than anything against some other thing. So yeah, I just don't think it's going to happen. We all come from too many different backgrounds.
It's the island of the JavaScript
Yeah,
browser.
It's a good metaphor. It's a deadly island, violent, deadly island.
Yeah. And even in the camps, we're battling. It's crazy. It's hilarious. Man.
It's good for people that are retired, I think, that are like kind of retired, I would say.
Yeah,
It's not a
one
great place
day.
to spend if you're early in your career. Just it's a great place to waste time.
Yeah.
All right, full
right.
stack. You can run code in both places.
There you go. And Laravel's
Makes
batteries
sense, makes sense
included.
to me.
Okay. Well, thank you both for joining.
Makes
Thanks
sense
for
to me,
coming,
guys.
guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
That was
I
fun.
think,
Sorry for
Fun
sorry for
times.
having to push it
Thanks for
back.
having me.
No worries.
Had a good time. Taylor,
All
we'll
right,
see you
Dax,
in,
do the outro.
Well, what I was to say, we're going to see Taylor in August, officially
Yes.
now, in Dallas. We're super excited for that. Kind of get everything planned.
For
but,
what? Why are you guys getting together in
we're
Dallas?
going to Laracon as
Oh.
Terminal, as part of the coffee thing.
Okay. When's Laracon?
Yeah.
August 27th.
August 27th and 28th.
I'll be camping with a bunch of kids.
Us too. Kidding.
Oh, I gotta come out to like a React conference at some point. It actually seems pretty lit at these conferences compared to a lot of other dev conferences.
Yeah, the React Miami one especially. It's like it's so
Yeah, React
loosely
Miami
tied
is
to
just
React.
like it has nothing to do with React. It's just a big
No.
like party.
I'm coming to that next year for sure.
Yes,
Yes.
please. Yes.
I'll be
That'll
there,
be great.
so we'll finally meet. That'll be great.
Yeah. The percentage of people that go to React
Nice.
Miami that don't use React is just increasing every single year. So we just got to keep that going.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. You want to end the
All right,
recording?
guys.
See you
cool.
guys. What'd you say, Dax?
You want to end the recording?
Oh, yeah. That's a great way to end it. I'll
Wait,
click the
did he
button
do the
that ends
outro? I don't-
recording.